We have a very special guest alert because on today's show, we are bringing on Tyler Wojciak, the host of the Locked On Irish podcast, to talk about Chargers first round pick Joe Alt and what makes him special and why he thinks Cam Hart's best football is ahead of him.
You are Locked On Chargers, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Chargers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, and welcome into the Locked On Chargers podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Wade, joined as always by my co-host, David Drogemeyer, and we've been covering the Chargers together for 8 seasons now, but this is our 6th year as the host of the Locked On Chargers podcast, bringing you your team every day. Thank you to the everydayers out there for making us your first listen, and if you don't want to miss special interviews like today's show, go follow or subscribe for free on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel and listen wherever you get your podcast from. And today, we're getting into an interview with Locked On Irish host Tyler Wojciak, who had really great insight on not only Joe Alt, but also Cam Hart, also Chris O'Leary, what he's been able to do with the safeties at Notre Dame, and also undrafted free agent Thomas Harper. But most importantly, at the end, got him to talk about the infamous Jerry Tillery. But today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Here he is, Tyler Wojciak. One of our favorite things to do this time of year is to get the Locked On College hosts on. And of course, the Chargers have brought a lot of guys in from this school. Today we have Tyler Wojciak, who's the host of the Locked On Irish, also a contributor for Fox Sports. Thank you so much for making the time for us today, man. Super excited to get into some of these Notre Dame players the Chargers drafted.
Yeah, I'm pumped to be here and talk about Notre Dame on the West Coast, aka the LA Chargers.
It is kind of funny, too, because Tom Telesco was a big Notre Dame guy. I mean, he took a lot of Notre Dame players, you know, good ones, bad ones, the Jerry Tillerys and the Alohi Gilmans. But first year of the new regime, and we're still seeing, 2 drafted Notre Dame players, an undrafted guy brought in from Notre Dame. So some things never change. And I mean, very good reason for that, too, because Notre Dame is putting out a lot of great players into the NFL. But we'll start with this. I mean, the Chargers made a statement with the 5th overall pick, taking Joe Alt and showing that they were a trenches team. And I think Notre Dame in a lot of ways is kind of the same, where it's a ton of offensive linemen getting drafted there. But the Chargers are making the transition to being one of those teams. But watching his tape, it was really hard to find a lot of flaws in his game. You always want to come up with the pros and cons list for someone like that. But as someone that was able to watch kind of every game of his, what do you think kind of made him special, made him into that top 5 pick in his time at Notre Dame?
You kind of hit the nail on the head. It's really hard to find flaws in his game. And Notre Dame has had plenty of great tackles come through the program and end up having really good NFL careers. I would say that Joe Alt was probably one of the most unlikely prospects to do so. He was the lowest ranked recruit in our class of 2021. He was actually listed as a tight end on some sites, and he didn't play offensive line in high school. Right. But
crazy.
His dad played in the NFL, so is that. He's also a giant, a literal giant. He was 6'8" as a freshman and had size, but did not have the strength yet. Then, he was. I think everyone expected him to be redshirted his freshman season, and then their starting left tackle went down with a knee injury in the season opener, and then they tried to reshuffle some things, and then all of a sudden, week 6, Joe Alt is playing, and you're like, man, this is really bad. This season could go off the rails, and he actually steadied the entire unit, which was crazy because, again, he'd only been playing the position for 8 months or so, so that was a sign like, okay, this kid might be something special if he's able to learn the position that quickly. And then as he progressed, his second year, he had Harry Hiestand as his offensive line coach, who's one of the greatest offensive line coaches of our time. So under Harry Hiestand, I think he learned a lot. Like, the technique has really sound fundamentals. And now that he's grown and he's continued to build his strength in the weight room, and he has a lot more experience now, I just feel like with his size, his footwork, his pedigree, being the son of an NFL player, like, he checks off every possible box you would want with an NFL left tackle. And I also think it is the perfect first draft pick of the Jim Harbaugh era, a left tackle who he's going to be a starter, so long as he doesn't get hurt, knock on wood. But I really just think he doesn't have any flaws, really. He checks every box. He's going to learn quickly. He's already proven that he can do that. And I thought it was a great selection for the Chargers.
Yeah, he's going to get switched over to the right side and play right tackle for the Chargers because, of course, they got the all-pro Rashawn Slater on the left side.
Well, another thing, too, like to your point, like, of course, Jim Harbaugh, and something we probably should have thought earlier, is not going to take the flashy wide receiver. He's not going Roma Dunze. He's not going Malik Neighbors. Of course, he's going the guy whose maybe biggest strength is just that he does everything pretty well, right? Instead of just the guy that has the explosiveness. I think you're totally right. That is the most Jim Harbaugh way this era could have started, for sure.
But hey, Joe Alt is, just the latest of Notre Dame offensive linemen selected very high. But it's a long list of dudes that have been able to kind of make their mark in the NFL. There's been so many first-round picks like Ronnie Stanley and Mike McGlinchey, Quentin Nelson in recent years. But it feels like every draft is just stacked with Fighting Irish offensive linemen. How has Notre Dame been able to become such a pipeline for NFL offensive linemen?
I would say the position sort of recruits itself at Notre Dame. The history of great offensive linemen goes back to like the 80s and 90s. The award for the best offensive line unit in college football is called the Joe Moore Award. And Joe Moore was the offensive line coach at Notre Dame under Lou Holtz. So, that kind of tells you all you need to know. That's cool. So he's been around. And then Harry Hiestand, who I mentioned earlier, was the offensive line coach for a good chunk of the Brian Kelly era, was just
and his son was a Chargers coach.
And the way that the offensive linemen who I've had the chance to speak to about Harry Hiestand, I mean, they talk about him almost as if he's like a deity, basically, right? He is like the offensive line guru. He is an absolute hard ass. Like, he is really, really hard on his players, and he's such a stickler about the fundamentals. But it is a big reason why Notre Dame has had so much success. They've had great coaches, and I also think that offensive linemen, the type of people that they are, I think Notre Dame as a destination is a little bit more attractive to that type of person. So I think when you look at the coaching, the personality that it takes to be a really good offensive line, and then you compare that to the culture that Notre Dame has tried to cultivate, they've always been a team that is sort of run first. And I just think it's a perfect destination for offensive linemen. And then as they continue to have more success with putting guys in the NFL, they're just going to keep getting more and more guys.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I think there's certain places, that are kind of known for that. Like, I guess that makes Notre Dame OLU, right? Offensive Line University, whereas you have like Iowa's. Yeah, for sure. I mean, Iowa's tight end U, and then you have, LSU with the pipeline. The pipeline. You know what? You know what? Yeah, Michael Mayer, Cole Komet. I mean, I guess there's a ton of, Notre Dame. Kyle Rudolph for sure. Yeah, I can't forget him. But, man, Iowa up there as well. But LSU, Malik Neighbors and Justin Jefferson and all those dudes. So I guess at a certain point, it does kind of happen like that, where it's like, if you want to make the NFL as an offensive lineman, go to the place that keeps putting offensive linemen into the NFL and getting them drafted in the top 10 in the draft, right? Because you have
having success.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, a lot of those guys have been great. Quentin Nelson, obviously Ronnie Stanley specifically, both of those guys have been really good. But we have more great stuff with Tyler Wojciak, including his thoughts on Chargers 5th-round pick Cam Hart and their new safety coach Chris O'Leary on today's Locked On Chargers podcast. First, though, I need to tell you guys about FanDuel because it's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. And right now, especially when it's not football season, the best way to kind of be really into the playoffs that are going on, also just their awesome Stanley Cup playoffs. The NBA playoffs have been really, really good so far. But if you can basically go in and just pick the biggest favorite to just win, not even cover the spread, and get $150 in bonus bets, I think that's an even better reason to go. But I always love the same game parlays, and right now with FanDuel, if you want to get on tonight's Nuggets-Wolves game, you can go with Nikola Jokic to score 30-plus and get 8 or more assists, and Anthony Edwards to score 30-plus and get at least 4 rebounds at plus 443 odds. All you have to do, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. One of our favorite picks from this draft class was Cam Hart. They were able to land him in the 5th round. Was super surprised he was still available there. I mean, I almost blew a gasket when he was there at pick 137 and they picked Tarheeb Still. And I was like, he was right there. Cam Hart, right there for the taking. They obviously end up taking him 3 picks later at pick 140. But when you look at the guy, I mean, he definitely has the NFL traits, right? I mean, 6'3", 200 pounds, good speed, long arms. And he was good at Notre Dame. Don't get me wrong. But it did also feel like there's probably another level there. Like all of the kind of traits that he had didn't translate into just, someone that was not a 5th round pick, right? Like he wasn't drafted in the 1st or 2nd round. Do you feel like we saw him kind of reach his potential at Notre Dame, or do you think that there's kind of still more we have to see from him? Like that there's still we're just kind of seeing the surface potential?
I think Cam Hart's best football is ahead of him. I thought he was absolutely outstanding for Notre Dame this past season. And if not for his history of shoulder injuries, he'd be a 2nd round pick.
Yeah,
like,
you're
he's
right.
That good.
Yeah.
Really impressive during the Senior Bowl preparation. But, you can't just ignore the shoulder injuries. And it's really unfortunate because when he decided to come back last year and play for Notre Dame, I think it took a lot of people by surprise because, he had already graduated from Notre Dame. He'd played there 4 years. And I think everyone just assumed he was ready to go to the NFL. But he made a really smart decision to come back and had an unbelievable season last year for Notre Dame. If you look at his coverage stats, he was not targeted often. If you look at it, like his stat sheet won't blow you away. He was only targeted 28 times because he blanketed dudes and he allowed 15 receptions for only 137 yards. He is a very physical corner. He has really long arms. He actually was converted from wide receiver. That's what he was recruited to play. And then he got on campus and they're like, you would be a great big cornerback. And that's exactly what he did. He went toe-to-toe with Marvin Harrison Jr. last year when they squared off. And I love Cam Hart. I love him as a player. I love his personality. He is like the perfect Notre Dame student athlete. And it's unfortunate for him that he had to deal with so many injuries throughout his time in college. But this past year, he played the whole season, didn't have any injuries. I did get pretty nervous, though. There was a play in the Senior Bowl where he tackled the guy in the backfield and he got up and he was holding his shoulder. And I got really nervous. He didn't come back in the game, which is, I think, more precautionary. But that's going to be part of the Cam Hart experience. He's an excellent player, but anytime he's in on a tackle, you're probably going to be a little bit concerned when he gets up, just hoping for the best that he's not injured again. Because, shoulders are just – it's a part of the body that once you injure it once, it has a tendency to get hurt more often. It's more vulnerable. So I love the pick. I'm so excited for him. I think he's going to be great with the Chargers so long as he stays healthy. If he does stay healthy, he's going to have a great career.
Yeah, I mean, like we talked about, the size and the length there, it's just so intriguing at the NFL level. I mean, you can really feel like size-wise, he can match up with pretty much anyone, on the outside.
And I think it's a great point too, just about like, hey, it's kind of hard to put up really big stats when guys aren't throwing you the ball your way, right? But you're right. That game against Marvin Harrison Jr., that's the one that sold me. That's the one that me and him watched where it's like, okay, I see the vision. Why is this dude going in the 5th round? And sometimes it just is as simple as, hey, 3 shoulder surgeries. People are going to shy away from that a little bit, but it also might be what landed the Chargers a really, really good prospect way later than he should have gone.
Yeah, hopefully Ben Herbert's able to work with him and get those shoulder injuries behind him. Yeah. But I'm definitely, I was one of the biggest advocates for the Chargers bringing in 2 defensive backs this year, is the fact that the Chargers hired Notre Dame coach Chris O'Leary to coach their safeties. What can you tell us about the job he was able to do with guys like Kyle Hamilton and Xavier Watts?
He was excellent at Notre Dame. He made the rise, climbed the ranks. He was a GA at one point at Notre Dame, and then they hired him to be the safeties coach. And I think it took some people by surprise at the time. And then he really proved his worth as a developer of talent. The one critique that fans had of Chris O'Leary was his recruiting ability, which isn't going to be a problem in the NFL. But when it comes to developing talent, he's one of the best in the business, and he was definitely a tough loss. And I know that he goes back with Jesse Minter. So it made sense for him to go to the NFL. And I think, you look at what he did with Kyle Hamilton, even though he was only the true safeties coach for Hamilton with 1 year. Hamilton credits him with really helping him take his game to the next level. And then you have Xavier Watts, who has one of the most unconventional career paths of literally any player in college football, especially in this modern era. He came in as wide receiver, then they switched him over to defense. He played a little bit of linebacker, then they put him at safety, and they almost had to go back to wide receiver because Notre Dame was so thin at the position, but they're like, no, he's staying at safety. And then last year has a breakout season, wins the Bronco Nagurski Award for one of the top defensive players in college football and an All-American and all of that. So I know that Chris O'Leary was a big part in his development. And, I mentioned the recruiting thing. Notre Dame hasn't had, outside of Kyle Hamilton, who is a 5-star prospect.
Sure.
They've not really had a ton of like really highly touted prospects to play the position. And yet it's been pretty steady so long as Chris O'Leary has been there. So he's been able to take guys and build them into better players. And I think he's going to be a really good coach in the NFL because all he has to do is focus on just coaching. He doesn't have to worry about recruiting. And for the record, I didn't even think he was that bad of a recruiter, but that was the one critique that some fans had about him.
Yeah, I think if you're taking a college coach from, college to the NFL level and someone says, hey, his biggest weakness is recruiting, you say, I'll take that for sure any day of the week.
And one more thing I wanted to mention, last year, he was a candidate to coach for the Baltimore Ravens. And I know that Kyle Hamilton was doing everything he could to get the Ravens brass to hire him. I don't think that it worked out, but I think that tells you how players feel about him.
Yeah, I'm one, Mike McDonald couldn't land him, but Jesse Minter does. So happy about that. But I mean, his rise has been pretty meteoric, right? I mean, going from Georgia State, then Division II, and then all of a sudden he's a grad assistant, and then the safeties coach at Notre Dame. Also was the Rovers coach there as well. But I mean, I'm excited to see what he can do. I mean, he has obviously Derwin James and Alohi Gilman, a guy we're going to talk about, to work with. But Xavier Watts, probably near the top of the list of guys, I wouldn't mind seeing on the Chargers after this upcoming season. But several Notre Dame players got drafted this year, including both of their starting tackles, not just Joe Alt, but also Blake Fisher as well. But they still have a ton of guys returning in 2024. They should still have a very talented team. And obviously, even under the new regime, this Chargers team loves drafting Notre Dame players. So which of the Fighting Irish players should Chargers fans be watching closely this year that could be playing on Sundays in 2025?
Benjamin Morrison is going to be the first player from Notre Dame taken off the board. He is a cornerback. He is going to be a first-round pick. I mean, second round at the absolute worst. He was the corner opposite Cam Hart, and I think they made up one of the best cornerback tandems, if not the best, in the entire country last year. Morrison he's like a freak physically. He has super, super long arms, has great ball skills, is also very physical, which is a trait that Notre Dame loves to have with their cornerback. So, depending on the Chargers' position in the draft, maybe he could be an option. I think Howard Cross and Riley Mills, two of Notre Dame's defensive tackles, they're excellent. They're probably not going to be in like the first 2 rounds. Howard Cross is a little bit undersized. Riley Mills, I think, is going to be one of those guys who has good senior season, but then he goes to the combine and he's going to just dominate all of the tests there because he's like been on Bruce Feldman's freak list for the past 2 years. Xavier Watts. Yeah, we've already talked about Xavier Watts a little bit. I'm sure that if Chris O'Leary has a chance to draft Xavier Watts, he is going to do it. So those are a few off the top of my head. I don't think you'll be in the market for a quarterback, so I won't mention Riley Leonard.
Yeah, hopefully not.
But those are the main guys. Mitchell Evans is a tight end in Notre Dame. As I kind of joked about earlier, we like to pride ourselves on being tight end. Yes, Iowa certainly does present a good case. The next tight end, excuse me, in the long is Mitchell Evans. Yeah. He actually suffered a torn ACL in like early November of this past year, but he was really breaking out, and I think he's going to be absolutely awesome this year. So if you're in the market for a tight end, I think Mitchell Evans would be a good one. But those are going to be the main guys unless someone breaks out and shocks us all.
Well, one of the best Charger stories last year was the coming out party of former Notre Dame safety Alohi Gilman. I remember watching him coming out and always seemed like he had a knack for just being in the right place at the right time and making those big plays, like stripping Vanderbilt receiver on the 1 yard line. Are you surprised at all at the success that Gilman has found at the NFL level?
Yeah, to be honest, I can't believe he's this good. I loved him when he was at Notre Dame. He's not the biggest guy, but he's just like, this is cliche to say, he's just a really good football player. He's a really tough, hard-nosed dude, not afraid to get in there in the box and make a tackle in the run game, but was also pretty effective in coverage as well. He actually transferred to Notre Dame from Navy. Yeah. And I remember when he transferred, I was like, okay, a Navy transfer. I know he's pretty good. And then this was still during the time when you had to sit out a year. Then he starts playing and then really broke onto the scene a little bit later on in his career, was a big part of that team in 2018 that went undefeated during the regular season, made to the college football playoffs. So he was a key piece to that defense, and I loved having him. but there was never a point where I was like, oh yeah, like Alohi's game is going to translate perfectly into the NFL. But I think it says a lot about him, his character, his makeup, his work ethic, that he exceeded all my expectations while he was at Notre Dame. And then he did it again when he's in the NFL. It's a great story. He's a fun player to root for. And you're right. He has just a knack for always being in the right place at the right time, physical, making the play. He plays until like the echo of the whistle, as some old school college football coaches would like to say. And he's great. I'm so happy for him and all the success that he's had with the Chargers.
Sixth round pick to a second contract. Gotta love that.
Yeah, and I mean, a legitimate starter. Obviously, the Chargers showed the faith they had him this year. They didn't bring any other safeties in to play with Derwin James and to start alongside him. So, I mean, it's awesome. I'll never forget that play at the 1 yard line. The ball just popped in the air. I mean, but he had like a few of those. There's like a few weird plays that it's just like Alohi Gilman found himself there. But at the same time, I totally get what you're saying, because like he seemed like one of those guys that's a really, really good college player, but that's kind of where it gets maxed out. And I know that Chris O'Leary actually talked about in his press conference, like, hey, when I was at Notre Dame, I was a graduate assistant, but I was really kind of a safeties coach. And I actually got to work with Alohi Gilman in his last season there. So it'll be cool for those guys to reunite. Obviously, he gets to reunite with Cam Hart. We have more with Tyler Wojciak, including some dirty details about Jerry Tillery, getting him to talk about Jerry Tillery, obviously an infamous Charger, and much more on today's Locked On Chargers podcast. First, I need to tell you guys about Game Time, because anytime I need tickets to anything, I open up my Game Time app, I go on there, and I make sure that I'm getting the cheapest tickets available, because that's always what you get with Game Time. And Game Time is now an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch. Another great thing to do is just open up the Game Time app, and there's probably things going on around you that you don't even know. Like going and seeing live comedy is something I really enjoy. Like, it's just something about being there in the atmosphere, everyone laughing along with you. There's been times where I've gone on Game Time, saw that there was a comedy show going on of somebody I didn't even know, got super cheap tickets, and had like a night that I'll never forget. That is one of the great things about Game Time. They always have killer last minute deals, all in prices, and the views from your seat is great. You get a panoramic view of your seat. You know exactly what the view is going to be from the seats that you have. And the other great part about it is upfront pricing. There's nothing worse about trying to buy tickets and then you feel like it's a really good price. Then you get to the end and all these hidden fees and things like that get them in there, and you're like, hey, maybe not as good as I thought. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. And the other guy that he gets to reunite with is a guy that only played at Notre Dame for 1 year, Thomas Harper. The Chargers continued to bring in those kind of players. If it wasn't enough to draft 2 Notre Dame players, like, you know what, let's bring one in an undrafted free agency as well, because we just like the cut of their jib, I guess. But he only played 1 year there, but he was able, I think, in maybe another kind of, feather in the cap of Chris O'Leary, was just, hey, guy transfers in from Oklahoma State. Year 1, he's starting 10 games for them. What were your thoughts on Thomas Harper in his lone season at Notre Dame?
When he committed to Notre Dame out of the transfer portal, I loved everything he said afterwards. He was like, I'm coming to Notre Dame to play football. He was all business, right? And he's like, this is the place I want to be. And I think that's perfect, because if you've ever been to South Bend, you'll know that there's really not a ton to do. And,
why offensive linemen love it there, right? Yeah.
The academics are one thing, but he was a 6th-year senior. So maybe it's just 5th year. Either way, he was all football all the time. And I was like, okay, this is really good. He missed spring practice because he was recovering from shoulder surgery. So all the concerns I have about Cam Hart, all of them apply to Thomas Harper, because he has dealt with a similar amount of shoulder injuries. All of them happened while he was with Oklahoma State, but still they linger, like we were talking about earlier. But he's another guy who's just a really, really solid football player. He missed 2 games with a concussion, I believe it was. And in Notre Dame's loss to Louisville, he was sorely missed. He was one of Notre Dame's best players on defense this year. And he's another guy, a lot like Alohi Gilman, who's just a really good football player. Like, he played the nickel for Notre Dame, and in Al Golden's defense, you're going to have to be in coverage a lot. It's Notre Dame's space defense, basically, even though they say they're a 4-3. They run nickel more than any other formation on defense. So he's out there. He's got to stick his nose in the run game. He's also got to make plays in coverage. And even though he's not the biggest guy, he's very physical. He probably had the hardest hit of any Notre Dame football player last year. He had a clean blitz off the edge, absolutely destroyed the quarterback from, I believe it was Central Michigan. I don't know. He might be dead because Thomas Harper absolutely annihilated him and forced a fumble on the play, and then got up and just acted like that's just what he does. So I wasn't shocked that he went undrafted because like physically the profile isn't really there. The injury history is obviously a concern, but I could definitely see him as an undrafted free agent who makes the roster and could be an asset on special teams because, like I said, he's just a football player, man. And that's what it takes to succeed on special teams in the NFL.
Yeah, especially, I mean, you're just kind of looking for those heat-seeking missiles, right? Guys that can get downhill, And Ryan Ficken, there's a guy he should be cozying up to. So we gave you all the easy ones. We talked about all the players and how excited we were about Notre Dame. But I just had one off the top of my head that, maybe we'll make it a little tougher on you. One of the most maligned Chargers Notre Dame players is a man by the name of Jerry Tillery. Jerry Tillery, drafted in the first round by the Chargers, 28th overall. Never felt like he kind of found his true potential, but there was always some weird stuff. His final season of his collegiate, of his rookie contract, I should say, he ended up getting cut halfway through, some weird locker room stuff. And then last year, he had the unmitigated gall to blatantly hit Justin Herbert, the golden boy, lay out of bounds. And honestly, probably a rallying cry that the Chargers needed under Brandon Staley, because that was kind of the only time we saw them united all season. Did you have any concerns about Jerry Tillery, the guy coming out? I mean, it does seem like he's a unique character. We won't have to bash him any more than that. But what were your thoughts of Jerry Tillery when he was coming out? Did you think, hey, this guy's going to go dominate in the NFL?
I certainly thought he'd be a lot better than he is.
Sure.
He was a really, really talented player in college and just an absolute force.
We had like 4 sacks in one game too, right? That was the hard thing I remember watching him. It was like 4 sacks against Stanford, but then like 4 in, yeah, exactly.
Dude, he was a huge recruiting win. Notre Dame got him over LSU. Notre Dame doesn't typically win those recruiting battles, especially for a defensive tackle, but they got him. And the funny thing about Jerry Tillery is that his freshman year, Notre Dame had I think it was Showtime. They did like a season-long documentary series about the team. It was called The Season With. And Jerry Tillery was one of like the main characters in the show because he was a freshman, highly touted prospect, and had a goofy personality. And he came off as like a really fun-loving guy, a good football player. And the reputation that he had on campus coming off of that documentary was one of like this really fun-loving guy. He was a football player who really immersed himself in the student body, which is not something that all football players do, but some of his best friends did not play football. And I wouldn't say that we were friends, but we'd be in the same place at the same time. And I just can't believe, I don't know what happened. Now he has this reputation as a dirty player, and I'm not saying it's unwarranted. He's done some seriously concerning things, but he played the end of the 2018 season when Notre Dame was really trying to make the college football playoff that year. He played with a torn labrum throughout November, and it was sort of a poorly kept secret around campus. So I thought, I thought he'd be a really good player in the NFL. Like he'd be a really hard worker. And I don't want to say he's not a hard worker necessarily, but clearly things have not worked out for him like a lot of us thought they would, and certainly would have hoped for, like you guys. But I remember it was not the Chargers. It was the Rams. Were you guys watching that game when he was on the Raiders and it was Monday Night Football, maybe Thursday Night Football? Baker Mayfield was the quarterback for the Rams in this game. He led a game-winning touchdown drive at the very end of the game, and Tillery had a critical unsportsmanlike conduct.
We definitely
and then
remember that.
A personal foul. And I was like, man,
so
he just does not have his head on right. So
I think it knocked them out of the playoffs too. And I think they needed that for the playoffs, and that kind of ended their season that year.
That was brutal.
Yeah, I can't say that I was totally locked into him throughout his time with the Chargers.
Sure.
I knew that he was a disappointment, but I just remember watching that game going, oh, okay, I see it now. All this stuff about Jerry Tillery, like I'm seeing it firsthand, and it was really bad. And then last year the hit on Herbert was ridiculous. So I don't know. I think his reputation has certainly changed since Jerry Tillery first came into my life.
Yeah, well, thank you for being a good sport. Definitely putting you, in your target audience. I know probably doesn't want to hear you talk badly, and you didn't. You did a masterful job making your way around Jerry Tillery. But it is funny because he obviously is kind of infamous in Chargers fandom.
Fine. We can.
Yeah, no, for sure. But thank you so much, man, for coming on. We really, really appreciate your insight. I'm sure we will see the pipeline from Notre Dame to the Chargers continue, and can't wait to get you back on again when that happens.
Yeah, we'll do this again next year after you guys draft 2 or 3 guys.
Another special thank you to Tyler Wojciak. I'm sure the Chargers will be drafting more Notre Dame players. It'll be interesting to watch some of those guys. And at least we can agree on some things with Jerry Tillery. Maybe not the player he thought he was in his time at Notre Dame, but it's super excited to have him on. He was great with us. Definitely get him on for any other Notre Dame players in the future. But make sure you guys are back here tomorrow by subscribing or following for free on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel and also wherever you get your podcast from, because it's what the Chargers are most known for in their social media department. It's the schedule release, and we'll be doing a live show tomorrow night on the schedule release. So make sure you guys are back here by subscribing and following for free on Locked On Chargers YouTube channel, but also following all of our social media. We'll be blasting it out there. You can find us on Twitter at Locked On LAC, on Instagram at Locked On Chargers, and our Locked On Chargers Facebook page as well. That's going to be so much fun. I'm so excited about it. So make sure you guys are back here tomorrow for the live show of the schedule release. But until then, take it easy and go Bolts.